Hello, everyone, and welcome to the Crucial Conversation. I'm Raga Olga de Silva, and today we are addressing a significant development in the UK that has profound implications for the trans community. The UK's Supreme Court ruling on 16th April sent shockwaves through the UK's trans community and allies. The unanimous judgment set the legal definition of a woman in the Equality Act of 2010 did not include transgender women who held gender recognition certificate. And the term sex in the Equality Act of 2010 refers strictly to biological sex. The chair of the Equality and Human Rights Commission, who is now preparing new statutory guidances, said the judgment meant only biological women could use single sex changing rooms and toilets. This decision, of course, has therefore spread widespread concern, confusion, and anxiety among the transgender community. Joining me today is my dear friend Bobbi Pickard, the founder of Trans in the City, a leading advocate for trans inclusion and rights. We'll delve into all kinds of things, personal, social, legal ramifications for this ruling, and discuss the path forward. Before we start, can I just give you a trigger warning to all those who have joined in? We may go into places and spaces that may be dark. Please be kind and respectful when you comment or engage. This is meant to be a safe space for all. Let me invite Bobbi in.
Hello.
Hey, Bobbi, how are you doing?
I'm Eve. I'm doing very well for seeing you. How are you doing?
Very good too. I just wanted to personally say that I love all that you do and admire you, as you know, for the courage that you show on a day-to-day basis, the way you show up for our community, and how you stand up for our rights and your rights. So, Bobbi, before we dig deep into the UK's Supreme Court's ruling, I just wanted to understand how has the trans community responded to this ruling? What are the predominant emotions and concerns you've observed? And on a personal level, how has this ruling affected you?
I think, generally, if we talk about the trans community generally, and especially trans women, this ruling is very much targeted at trans women, although it'll affect all trans and non-binary people. I think most trans women have reacted with horror, actually. This is to the trans community, this seems like the first step to 1930s Germany, and that type of segregation. And what's the next phase after this? They're going to make us wear pink triangle badges and segregate us even more in life and all of the rest of the stuff. So it is an absolute horror. It's hard enough being one of the 48,000 trans women in the country, tiny minority, sorry, but so it's hard enough being a trans woman in this country, but now this lifts and empowers the hatred to a huge level. There's so many people in the trans community now that are saying that they feel housebound, they feel scared to go out. I think looking forward, it's going to have a huge effect on trans women again, especially in terms of their healthcare, because we'll avoid going to any type of clinic or hospital environment. So, we have a bad enough time with our health anyway. It's going to make it even worse because, things that could be picked up early, we won't be putting ourselves into a position where that would be possible. So, I almost died last year because I wouldn't go to a hospital before the ruling. And it was only my girlfriend that dragged me to the hospital that saved my life, but that was in the times when I could have expected to have been treated with respect and dignity in a clinical environment or indeed anywhere. And I think, the ruling on the 16th has pretty much confirmed that those days are past. From my side of things, I've been doing trans awareness now for 24 years, and I've been involved in the trans community for longer than that. From my side of things, it kind of feels that I've just wasted 24 years of my life, and I should have just started last Thursday. All of the work that we've done, and things in some cases are better than they were 24 years ago. So it's not wasted, and I know it's not wasted.
So
But
we would, yeah.
backwards now.
We were just talking just before we went live on how things have changed or how things were 30
Yes.
years ago. Do you think things, like you said, some things are better, but a lot of things have gone back, right? So what are the things that you would have loved to see change?
You know, the things that I love that have changed is that the Pride community is now a Pride community. You know, when I first started going out, you know, 30 years ago and started doing this, all those years ago, we were kind of tolerated in gay bars and lesbian bars, but it was very much a Russian roulette whether you were going to get beaten up or whatever. And we had like our own specific trans bars that were typically really grim because no one had any money and there were so few of us. So that's changed. You know, I think the love and acceptance within the LGBTQIA community is a huge move forward. You know, as long as we take out, I don't count them as part of the LGBTQIA community, but if we take out some of the obvious trans exclusionary people that happen to be, you know, gay or lesbian or whatever. So that's a massive move forward. I think in terms of employment and protections in employment, that's a huge move forward. I mean, really, you know, the Gender Recognition Act 2024, the Equality Act 2010, that's obviously been affected by the Supreme Court ruling. All of the things, you know, Article 8 of the European Convention of Human Rights, the Data Protection Act, even, you know, all of those things have moved mainland Britain. So obviously Northern Ireland's not covered by the Equality Act and other bits and pieces, but as a country, we've moved forward. I think typically, people's attitudes have moved forward. I think the thing that's gone backwards is this ruling, but I think that's really the amount of money that's been coming into the country to you know, from American and Russian right-wing organisations and Europe. I mean, I think the European Parliament, the ILGA report that I read a while ago, I think it was $3.1 billion worth of funding to lobby parliaments and buy media. So we're seeing this skewing, this twist, and obviously right-wing sentiment tends to prevail when you've had either a social shock to society, or you've had an economic one, and we've had both. We've had COVID. We've had you know, a huge financial crisis now that we really haven't come out of. So at that time, most people tend to want to look more inwards to protect themselves and the people like them. So I think we've kind of reached a perfect storm at the moment, you know.
Yeah. So, Bobbi, I just want to come back now to what this whole ruling is about. Could you please, you know, provide an overview of the UK Supreme Court's decision from a layperson's point of view, and its, you know, and its immediate implications for trans women and trans men in the UK? I don't think we really understand it fully, you know.
Yeah, that's fine. And actually, I think the biggest implications to the ruling will be to cisgender people, funnily enough. And especially employers. So essentially, the Supreme Court, there's three protected characteristics that really are affected by this in the Equality Act, which are the protected characteristic of gender reassignment, the protected characteristic of sex, and also the protected characteristic of sexuality. So the Supreme Court actually defined characteristics within sex and sexuality for the first time actually in British history. So that's never happened. Alfred the Great even didn't bother doing it because he probably knew even then that it was too complex. But what they did was define sex as this rather ambiguous and not defined in law term of biological sex. Now, anybody that's gone past GCSE biology will tell you that biological sex is so much more complex than chromosomal sex. There's even variations within chromosomal sex, but there's chromosomal sex, there's hormonal sex, there's genetic sex, and they're all in a great big melting pot that determines where you actually end up on that biological sex scale, and actually where you end up might be somewhere completely different to where you actually are. So it's a complete muddle. What the Supreme Court then actually said was, well, actually, your biological sex is the sex that gets put on your birth certificate. So the sex that's on your birth certificate is your biological sex. And then it came into its first muddle, because then it said, well, and that applies to anybody at all. So those people that were, let's use their term, biologically female at birth, so assigned female at birth, their biological sex is female. If you have a biological sex or birth certificate that says your assigned sex is male, but you're a trans woman, then previously in the Equality Act, you would have been, and indeed on every other bit of documentation, you would have been able to change your biological sex. So you would have been treated as a woman under the Equality Act. So that's now changed. You're treated as a man under the biological sex and the sex protected characteristic. So that's kind of straightforward. The thing where the wheels fall off, the first instance where the wheels fall off, is those people that have a gender recognition certificate. And out of 48,000 trans women, as we're talking about women in the country, then we think there's probably around 4,000 trans women, 4,000 to 5,000 trans women that have a gender recognition certificate, which is the process under the Gender Recognition Act 2004 that allows you to change your birth certificate to reflect your gender, so long as you reach a really high bar and you're judged to be at a level where you should be considered in all aspects of law the sex of your gender recognition certificate. So what that then means is your gender recognition certificate updates your birth certificate. So trans women or trans people with a gender recognition certificate will have a birth certificate and all their documentation in their gender recognition certificate sex. But the Supreme Court's now said that those people can't be considered female if they're trans women, because their biological sex, their sex at birth, wasn't female. I have no idea how on earth anybody is going to tell or prove that somebody with a gender recognition certificate isn't the sex on their birth certificate. So the Gender Recognition Act is very plain and says that owning a gender recognition certificate is confidential. No one can ask you whether you've got one. If they do, then actually you're covered under the Equality Act, under the gender reassignment protected characteristic as well. So you have two levels of confidentiality there. And you're also protected under the Data Protection Act. So if somebody asks you, if you're trans, if you have a gender recognition certificate, you can bring a discrimination claim against them. Wow. So the thing that, and actually, to be honest, you're protected even if you haven't got a gender recognition certificate under the Equality Act, under the gender reassignment protected characteristic, because that's confidential as well. So the clarity that Lord Hodge announced as part of his ruling has actually absolutely made a mess of UK law. the people that are going to suffer the most because of this are employers. So before, you had 3 types of toilets, and it always comes back to toilets. Let's just talk about toilets. I started getting into human rights because of all of these high ideals of what I wanted to do, and I seem to have spent the last 8 years talking about toilets. So I should have been a plumber, but so before the ruling, there were 3 types of toilets. There were single-sex spaces for women's toilets. There were gender-neutral toilets, and they included toilets that were single cubicles that were just called a toilet, or, for instance, disabled toilets are typically gender-neutral. They can be used by anybody. And then there is, yeah, I know, Rochelle, there's 8, but that, sorry, there's a thing that's just popped up saying there's 8,500 gender recognition certificates. That covers all trans people, so trans men and trans women. So we just assume that it's half and half split. It's about 4,500 to 5,000. Sorry, going back
to the toilets, yeah.
Yes, and there's then there was male single-sex spaces, men's toilets. Now, before this ruling, cisgender women, and let's look at for the women's side because that's where all of the noise is about. Cisgender women, and so those women that aren't trans, and trans women could use the women's toilet, and they could use the gender-neutral toilet if they wanted to. You might have had a cisgender woman saying, "I don't want to share my space with a trans woman." There's a difference between comfort and law.
Yep.
She might have been uncomfortable sharing the space, but actually she didn't really have much of a discrimination claim for a trans woman and a cisgender woman being in a toilet together, because, both protected, both allowed to use those spaces under law. So she might not feel comfortable, but there's no real strong discrimination claim that she would have won by doing that. After this ruling, it's now said that trans women, whoever they are men. So if you have a space in your business that you say is a women's only toilet, that makes it a single-sex space under the Equality Act, which means that only people covered by the sex protected characteristic under the Equality Act and deemed to be women are allowed to use that space. But this is where the wheels fall off completely, because now the government and the Equality and Human Rights Commission has said is trans women, whether they have a gender recognition certificate or not, should use the male toilet. Now, that on the face of it seems fine under the Equality Act, but it's really not, because being trans is confidential. Owning a gender recognition certificate is confidential. So nobody can disclose the fact directly or indirectly that somebody is a transgender person or undergoing gender reassignment. So if you say, for instance, to me, "Bobbi, you're not allowed to use the women's toilet anymore because the Equality Act says you're a man, you have to use the men's toilet." So I go, okay, well, I'll go and use the men's toilet. Somebody sees me using the men's toilet. The only woman using the man's toilet, and now everybody knows by default that I'm a trans woman. So that employer has now disclosed the fact that I'm a trans woman. I can now take them to an indirect discrimination case under the Equality Act, under the Gender Recognition Act, and under the Data Protection Act. I can also take them to court under Article 8 of the European Convention of Human Rights. So that's a really bad situation for an employer. So they might say, well, okay, we're going to ignore the government then, follow the Equality Act to the letter and say it's a women's toilet that allows trans women and cis women to go there. Now, under the Equality Act, now that makes it a mixed space, which is fine. That's all perfectly fine. I go into the women's toilet. A cisgender trans exclusionary person is in there. She can then take an indirect discrimination case against the employer for breaching the protected characteristic of sex under her rights. The minute she does that and outs me as being trans in her toilet, I can then also take the employer to court for breaching the Equality Act, the Gender Recognition Act, the Data Protection Act, and Article 8 of the European Convention of Human Rights. So the employer now has 2 discrimination claims. So you might think, well, actually, that's fine then. We'll let trans people use the gender-neutral toilet. Now, this is where it slightly differs. So for non-binary people, obviously, as far as the government's concerned, then they don't exist the same as intersex people as well. You might have you will have a less strong case in law if you don't have a gender recognition certificate. But if the employer then says to me, well, trans people, you always have to use the gender neutral toilet, well, then it's the same as directing me to use the man's toilet. Because if I'm the only woman using a gender neutral toilet, then again, they're disclosing my trans status. And there we go. I've got all of those acts behind me where I can take them to a discrimination case. Gender neutral toilets for everybody are probably the safest option for employers at the minute. But we've gone from this stupid place where actually a few people might not have liked it, but we had a situation where people could just go to the toilet at their work, and few people might not like it. The law might have been perfect, but it worked. It was workable. What we now have is the situation where no one can go to the toilet without risking, an employer effectively cannot offer anybody a toilet without running the risk of an indirect discrimination claim against them. So it's absolutely ludicrous. If I was the owner of a business right now, I would be writing to the Prime Minister and the Business Secretary saying, put aside all of your personal views on trans people and all the rest of the stuff. This is going to affect business in the hugest possible way. It's going to cost a whole load of money to change toilets to whatever, some solution that doesn't exist at the minute. But as well as that, there's going to be a whole load of discrimination claims being raised against lawyers. There's going to be a whole load of tribunals, all because of one small group of people that did a ruling in the Supreme Court, didn't very obviously bring in the correct legal minds, didn't bring in any of the legal minds that had any expertise on the complexities of transgender law, came up with this, frankly, nursery school level definition of biological sex. And that has absolutely blown everything away from an employer's point of view.
And no one was consulted, right? The trans community wasn't consulted. That's what shocked me the most.
They had offers from, there are some, not just trans people, there are some absolute razor sharp minds that have been looking at this and all of the different angles of this for many, many years. We've got KCs that are transgender that have written multiple books on the complexities of this, and yet it was just left down to a few people just shut in a room, probably with a few whiskies by the look of things, and to just come up with what they seem to have thought was the easiest solution. But with all of these things, there's always very good reasons why things aren't defined. And if you talk to the people that wrote the Equality Act, and it's not that long ago, they're still there. They could have consulted them and said, why was it written in this way? Why didn't you define specifically the term sex?
Yeah.
Then actually what the message they would have received was, well, we didn't define it because you can't. Because there's too many complexities. You can't put a label on something that's infinitely varying. It's like kind of saying, grass is green. There we go. I'm going to stick a green label on grass. But it's just blatantly not. If you just go and look in your garden, some of the grass is green, like the 9 billion different shades of green or whatever it is that we can perceive, and all the rest of them. But lots of it's brown, lots of it's purple, some of it's yellow. So
Exactly.
you can't we're talking about something that's a natural thing, and everything in nature is infinite.
Sure.
So it doesn't matter what label we stick on. I mean, we can stick a label on it if we like. I mean, nature will take absolutely no notice, and we'll end up having far less of the thing under the label than all of the bits and pieces outside of the label. Waste of time. And that's why it wasn't defined in the first case in the Equality Act.
So what happens to the gender recognition certificates now? So are they still valid? What?
Yeah, absolutely. And so there's no change to the gender recognition certificate. The gender recognition certificate, however much of an absolute pain it is, it's easier now than it was in my day. God, I'm old. But it's easier to get one now. It's not easier in terms of evidence and all the rest of the stuff. The process is exactly the same, but it's online. So at least that's easier and it's cheaper. That's still valid. And if you get a gender recognition certificate, and I say to any transgender person, they're not available to non-binary people, simply because I assume the government doesn't give a monkeys about non-binary people. It doesn't seem to have done for the last 10 years. I'd absolutely recommend any transgender person, if they have a diagnosis of gender dysphoria from a clinician, proof that they're having treatment from a clinician, 2 years evidence that they've been living in their acquired gender, I mean, you need to fill out a statutory declaration and get it signed by a solicitor provider. If you can fulfill those criteria, go and get a gender recognition certificate, because it gives you far more protection under law at the minute. Gender recognition certificate also gives you, it changes the birth certificate, which is fab. It's a really affirming thing to have, but it also lets you marry as you, and it lets you officially be buried, gives a death certificate in your gender, although coroners tend to be very coroners tend to be kind people, actually, and let you and let the family decide.
Yeah, I mean, this is such a complex space, right? That we're talking about. I mean, I was thinking about this last night. I was thinking, what about hospitals? I mean, how does it impact? Like you said, if you have a health scan, you have to go into a hospital. How does it impact? Those are really crucial and important issues that all of us have to deal with.
Absolutely. The most important thing about hospitals actually is how fearful trans people, trans women especially, will be now to go into any clinical environment. We're already fearful. Frankly, we already avoid going into any clinical environment if we possibly can. I mean, I almost died last year because I wouldn't go anywhere near a doctor or a hospital.
Sorry, and why is that, Bobbi? Why wouldn't you want to go anywhere near a doctor or a hospital?
Because it's pot luck whether you're going to receive any dignity or any safety, or whether you're going to have somebody that's transphobic. I had I think the last time prior to last year when I went to hospital was probably, I think, 2020 or so. Went to a doctor's rather, was probably 2020, down in Brighton. I had the most, you kind of expect Brighton to be really lovely, but I had the most hideous experience of this doctor writing notes, saying, the whole thing was completely unprofessional, but it's like, this bloke, I can't even remember why I was there. Oh, this bloke wants a blood test or whatever. And it's like, just writing out the notes that I saw afterwards. They were really, 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 really horrible. So, trans people, nobody would put yourself into a place where you feel unsafe. Nobody does. You'd be utterly mad to. But now we're being, trans people, trans women again, especially, never felt safe going into hospital or any clinical environment. And now we're being told that we're going to be actively vilified if we go into it. So trans people will not be going there. And that will massively impact our health. But, the other thing, hospital wards are single-sex spaces. So the same thing applies. If all of a sudden I go to a hospital and the hospital manager, ward manager, whatever goes, I think you're a trans woman, so I'm going to put you on the male ward, then there's my indirect discrimination claim there.
Yeah.
So, all of this noise that you're getting coming out of, West Streeting and, the EHRC of like huge overreaching of the, and let's be honest, trans exclusionary groups have been waiting for a ruling. It doesn't, it could have been anything. There's hundreds of cases they were trying. We had to win all of them. They only had to win one. Now they've got one. They're going to pick that ball up and run with it at 1,000,000 miles an hour and see what they can do. I think they're going to run straight into a storm of litigation. In fact, I can guarantee they will, because the two things, actually three things I'd say to any trans person at the minute: if you can, get a gender recognition certificate, get it online, get yourself a gender recognition certificate, go and join a union. Doesn't matter what union. Frankly, the bigger ones like GMB and stuff like that are massively trans inclusive and will give you legal protections and all the rest of the stuff. And the third thing is know your rights.
Yes.
Understand what your rights are. And if anybody steps 1 millimeter over them, nail them. Even if your employer is your best friend in the world, do it. Just do it. Because the only way we're going to get people to listen now is if every single time somebody steps over the line, we call them out on it. And that's what we need to do.
Sure. I mean, go on. Sorry.
Oh, sorry. Finding out what your rights are involves reading, really, So read the Equality Act, read the Gender Recognition Act, read Article 8 of the European Convention on Human Rights, the other stuff, the health and safety at work, the two acts, the 1992 and the 1974, and all of that are kind of by the by, but everything's all interlinked. But no one has the right to ask you if you're transgender.
So what? I'm coming back to the toilets and the hospital and the healthcare system. So what happens if an organization does not have a gender-neutral toilet, for instance, or what happens if in a hospital environment, say there's an emergency, and sadly, even if you don't want to go right now, but in an emergency, you may be wheeled into the hospital. So what happens, and if you're put in a male ward, as you said? So what do you do in that instance?
In that instance, I mean, if you're in the place where in a place where you can talk, and you're a trans woman and you find yourself in a male ward, you call over the person that's running the ward and tell them very straight that you're breaching Gender Recognition Act, the Equality Act, and European European Convention on Human Rights. Get their name, get their organisation. There'll be a patient management group or whatever. Asked to see them straight away, and just go from there. But obviously people aren't in people are in hospital because they're seriously ill. So it depends on
the situation, right? Yeah, because I know of one trans woman who went back into the closet anyway, just even before all this had started happening, because they're scared of going into hospital systems, especially care homes, where there's so much of homophobia and transphobia. So, and then this basically has given license, isn't it, to people to even discriminate even further. And
it's huge. It's empowered those people that are trans exclusion, really, like let's be honest, the Labour Party and the European the Equalities and Human Rights Commission hugely empowered them to. They seem to think they can do whatever they like now, but it's massively empowered hate. Those people that for whatever reason don't like the trans community, it's hugely empowered them now.
Absolutely, and I've seen that happening around me as well.
And of course.
The last couple of days, the last 1 week, in fact, during Lesbian Visibility Week that we've been celebrating.
Sure.
I met a lot of us, and a lot of our trans women. And Bobbi, it is so tragic to see my friends and well-wishers who are distraught, who are distressed, who don't know what is happening. And I'm going to just give a trigger warning, and I want to know whether this is happening in the UK as at the moment, where someone said to me that there have been a few instances of suicides. People have tried to take their own lives because of this. And is that happening? And how do we support as a collective so that they are not that vulnerable and we can provide at least support? What would you say we do?
Yeah, I just need to leap in on that because it is, we've just gone past Lesbian Visibility Week, and that's just such a fabulous week that needs to be celebrated. There's also a part, let's not forget that lesbian is now defined under the Equality Act. So the first time in history, someone's identity is defined in law. Lesbians can only be biological women that are in a relationship with another biological woman. And gay actually is defined as well, which is a biological man that can only be in a relationship with a biological man. So there's no gay women anymore, according to the Supreme Court, all of that sort of stuff. Again, coming back to same-sex spaces and wording, it's very, very important now. If you're running a lesbian group and you call it a lesbian group and you have more than 25 people as part of your group, that now automatically excludes trans people. So you might be the most inclusive LGBTQIA plus women's group in the country, but if you call it a lesbian group, you now automatically exclude trans people unless you say you include them. So that's a really, really important point. Coming back to the effect on people's well-being, and especially trans women, again, we already know that like 92% of trans people have suicidal ideation, and almost 50% attempt suicide in their lifetime. I've heard from some healthcare providers that there's been 17 young people that have taken their lives since Donald Trump got in, or won the vote last November. There's 3 people that I know that have contacted me in the last week telling me that their mental well-being is at the time at that place now where they feel not just suicidal ideation but firm suicidal thoughts now, which is the next space on. Trans people, trans women especially, are incredibly vulnerable when it comes to suicide. I've been there myself multiple times. I've got I've got a super highway down to there. It's not just like a beaten path; it's a super highway. And I think the important thing to remember actually is once you've been there, once you've been at that point, once you've been at that precipice, then you don't have to go through all the gates and reasoning that got you there. Once you've, for the first time, gone through those questions of, do I want to take my own life? What will happen to my family or my partner or my dog? What will people think? All of those questions that stop you from moving forward to the point where you take your own life. You only have to go through those gates once. You don't have to. You already know the answers when you've been there. So actually, things like this are incredibly dangerous for the trans community because we're not slowed up reaching to the point where we think, I've had enough. And that's what makes it so dangerous for trans people, in situations like that. This is what people don't realize.
You okay?
Me?
Yeah.
I'm all right. I mean, I've been doing this for 24 years and I've been through tough times. I've been through incredibly tough times. I've been incredibly lucky to get through like at least 3 of those times and still be here, and it's I spent a few days crying and feeling a bit of despair. I've been doing this for 24 years. From the times when things were awful for trans people, we weren't included anywhere. Even Stonewall hated us. Stonewall was sending out videos saying like, just because he dresses differently, don't think he's gay. He might just be a tranny. That was their like mid-90s video that they sent out. So I've been through some crap times and I think I've been there with the trans community through some crap times. Kind of feels almost like I've wasted 24 years in lots of ways. It feels like I might as well have not bothered doing the previous 24 years and just started last Thursday, really. So that's hard. And I spent a couple of days, I guess, crying and grieving, on the Thursday and Friday. I didn't really know what to do. And then funnily enough, I got out of it because of 3 amazing lesbians. One of them's my partner, Claire, although according to law now, she isn't a lesbian anymore because she's married to a trans woman. And 2 amazing friends that I've made down in where I live. And actually, the law's not particularly clear on whether, if you're a late life lesbian, whether you can still call yourself a lesbian either, actually. So they might not be lesbians either anymore.
So much ambiguity,
yeah. So after that, I think it's a grief cycle, and I got through the loss and the shock, and then I moved on to anger.
Yeah.
And now I think I'll probably sit in the anger phase for a while actually, and just let that bubble along, and give that its head and use that to get things done.
So Bobbi, how do you feel when people reach out to you? And I know a lot of people reach out to you and they say, we are here to support you. We are standing in solidarity with you.
Yeah.
So how do you feel when does it feel just like words to you, or what?
Yeah, of course it does. Yeah. I mean, it depends who it's coming from. I think I had probably 500 messages of from that Thursday going forward, and obviously, you sent me a message, thank you. But when it comes from someone like you, or it comes from someone like Polly Shoot, or it comes from someone from a Pride, or someone that I know is a trans ally, that will really get out there and and get stuck in. If it comes from Linda Riley or something, then I know that they mean it and they're going to do something. But out of those 500 messages, then, there's a hell of a lot of like, oh, we're really sorry, this is really awful, L with the T, why stand with you, trans rights are human rights, 500 messages, all completely meaningless, frankly. All that's doing is making the sender feel good and making the sender feel like they're a trans ally. But, save the energy, like, just save a bit of coal being burnt in a power station. It's like there's if you're not going to do something, then I'm just not interested in hearing it, really. I'd much rather hear that somebody has done something, and really, right at this minute, if you want to do something, then write to your local MP, write to the business secretary if you own a business, write to the Equalities Minister, but most of all, write to the Prime Minister, especially if you're a cisgender woman. Write to the Prime Minister, say, I'm a cisgender woman, I don't feel unsafe around trans women, I feel fine sharing my facilities with them, you're wrong. Because at the minute, the Prime Minister is in this bubble of trans exclusionary messages, and he's just not hearing the messages from anybody that doesn't mind sharing their space with a trans woman. So write him a letter this week, next week, every single week until he gets the message. You can find his email address online. It's really just search on Google, look up the government website. You can get his email address, send him an email, write him a letter. His address is quite simple, and I'm sure you can all guess it. So, but write him a letter, let him know, because unless you're doing that, then whatever else you're doing is meaningless. Yeah. Don't waste your time sending me a message. Use that time to send him a message.
Sure. And Bobbi, I think we are going to all do this. One, I also wanted to know that where can people find out about their rights? Is there, yeah.
It's difficult finding out what your rights are.
Yeah.
There's lots of trans groups actually in the last few weeks that have started sort of summarizing it. I think Translucent put something out that I saw. I'm sure Gendered Intelligence have put something out as well.
Sure.
I guess we can put. I might put something out from a rights at work perspective for trans people on Trans in the City, and I think we'll put that through the. So we've got a members group of trans and non-binary people that are trans and non-binary at work. So that's on LinkedIn, so you can join that, and I think we'll probably put it out through there. I've been running sessions for our sponsors, explaining all of the nuances of employment law and the mess that it's made in the last week or so. I'll be running some more of those. At the minute, I have to keep that contained to our sponsors because, frankly, Trans in the City is not going to be here unless people start paying the money and start being sponsors. And frankly, I need to be able to show sponsors that it's worthwhile being a sponsor of Trans in the City, or shut down and just go back to being like Trans in the City, being like Bobbi Pickard again, but I don't want it to be like that. All not-for-profits, especially trans and non-binary, are suffering with funding at the minute. I think what I might do this week is do a session that explains it for other LGBTQIA plus charities and not-for-profits, so they're all up to speed.
That'll be great.
I think it's. I think there's this whole thing in this country, isn't it? That and I know we've had this conversation before, so I know you know. There's this whole thing in this country that if you're talking about LGBTQIA rights, or if you're talking about anything about your life experience, then you should just be giving it away free. And it's like, well, I
we
mean,
know that.
I'd love to, but unfortunately, I've still got a mortgage to pay, and I've got a hungry cavapoo, and, and like all of those things,
So, Bobbi,
just answering how you can sponsor trans.
yeah, I'm just going to ask that question to you. And is there a link?
So if you're an individual or a small business, then it's probably the easiest way is probably to go to our crowdfunder and just do it through there. We do have different sponsorship levels. So if anybody is in a bigger organization and they want to sponsor us, then I can send the sponsorship pack out, and that gives you different levels of hours of free consultancy, sort of my time and everything. And I think I need to, I've never been a person that blows my own trumpet, but I think I'm probably one of the only people that's got proper corporate EDI experience across 80 different countries and runs a not-for-profit and has been doing trans inclusion for 25 years. So as far as I'm told, all of that means that my consultancy is worth a bit of money. So we've wrapped up some free consultancy hours into the sponsorship level, and you get free events and free training and all of that sort of stuff wrapped up in the Transit City sponsorship. But it's probably for sort of small, medium UK national organisations and upwards. So in anything. If you want to sponsor, just ping me an email. You can find my contact details on the transinthecity.co.uk, and we can have a chat.
info@transinthecity.co.uk, if I remember. But we will put a link. We'll give the audience your email address, and I'll also put a link to Trans in the City website, because this will
use the contact form on the
sure.
on the website to contact us.
And this will sit on the YouTube and other channels for a long time. So if the audience, like Bobbi said earlier, it's great to show solidarity and use words, but it's time to act. We don't want Trans in the City to fall down. We want Trans in the City to continue, because this is very important for us as society, not just as individuals, as society. Bobbi, coming to the next thing, and I'm aware that we've got limited time now, but last weekend we all marched, right? In the UK, we all marched. I mean, I was here at the London March, and we were told there's 20,000, 25,000, 30,000. I don't know the actual estimate. But that's estimated. Actual numbers, the estimate was about 25,000, 30,000. That's huge. So do you think protests? Yeah, possibly. It was amazing. The vibes, the love, the solidarity. People turned out and genuinely turned out.
Yes.
So something like this. Do you think marches and protests help? And do you think this can address the issue and maybe things can be overturned? Is that a possibility at all?
So I am. I'm always in this. This is one of the things that really I find difficult in Trans in the City, because I work in corporate and I work with businesses. Then I'm not allowed. I can't be the real activisty torches and pitchforks person that I used to be before I started doing it. So I have to temper my views and my language, and I have to make sure that to be able to work in that area, which I think is an important area of activism, I have to make sure that it's that I do it in a way that works for them as well. It doesn't mean that I don't give them a hard time. I just have to give them a hard time in the right way. I love protest. I think it's one of the fundamental pieces of human right to be able to express yourself and tell people when they're doing something that's wrong and you don't agree with it. And I think it's the most wonderful, powerful thing when you get a group of people all joined together, like we saw in Bristol and Nottingham. I know Katie was in Nottingham and London and all over the place. It's just beautiful. How effective is it? It's really only... It is effective. Whatever people say, it is effective because other people see it and think, oh, blimey, maybe I need to find out about this. it's not as effective in this country at the minute because the press black it out. 25,000. I think that's really, really conservative estimate for
Yeah.
apparently I'm in the Sunday Times today, and that's normally
Are you okay? We must.
apparently that's something that normally gives me a nice wave of transphobic hate on the Monday. So we'll see.
Gosh, I can't wait. So in terms of businesses, you work with a lot of organizations. You talked about sponsors. Apart from sponsors coming on board and supporting you, what
Yes.
else do you think they need to do to promote inclusivity, and protecting trans rights?
The first thing they need to do is send something out to all of their trans and non-binary people. And even if they don't think they've got any, they almost certainly will. If they've got more than 100 people, then they'll have a trans and non-binary person by the law of averages. Send a note round, not just for the trans people, but send it to the trans people saying, we understand the situation in this country at the minute is extremely difficult, extremely scary, and you might feel unsafe.
Yeah.
You're safe here. That's all they need to send around. They don't need to make a political statement.
Yeah.
They just need to say, you're safe here. You're as safe here as anybody else, and we'll protect you like we protect everybody else. That's all they need to send around. But what that also does is send a message around to all the cisgender people that says, treat these people with respect. And that's all we've ever asked for, So that's what they need to do. When it comes to the mess of toilets and who should use what, then good luck to them. Get some good lawyers is the only advice I'd give them. Lawyers must be jumping up and down with glee at the moment. But write to the business secretary. Write to the business secretary and say, you've now put my business at risk and there's nothing I can do about it. Because if nothing else, the government will listen to business because the government's interested in the economy. So if all of a sudden our businesses are spending a fortune on lawyers, a fortune on trying to keep staff who leave because they feel unsafe, and a fortune on reconfiguring their offices and toilets to try and find a way around this problem, that's going to impact the amount of profit that a business will make. That's not even counting the exec time, the people team's time, the diversity and inclusion team's time, the communications team's time. All of that cost to businesses has now been created by one judge saying it's common sense, and it adds clarity by saying trans women can't be women. And that's what the businesses need to tell the business secretary. You might think it's common sense, but it's going to cost billions.
Yeah. So it's not only just it's going to cost billions, but it's also going to cost as an emotional, cost to it as well. Cost of life. There's a lot of it. It's a very expensive, very very expensive, ruling, isn't it? On all. And yeah. So, Bobbi, in terms of, I think it's like we've spent an hour, and I would love to spend more. But just is there anything you want to convey to our audience? Especially those who want to support trans rights and inclusion. I mean, I know this particular interview. You opened my eyes to so many things. I've learned so much, and I am in the community. I do work in the community. I hang out with trans women. I've been hanging out with trans women in India forever, as you know. But I still learned so much today. So is there a message for a layperson, again, I say, or to the community, or to organizations watching this, to your allies, to the trans community as well? What is the kind of support you require, and what should we be doing?
I think, for those, I get asked, how can I be a better ally? I do 100 and something events a year. I get asked every single event, and frankly, I started getting a bit angry about being asked about it because, it's like the real answer is do anything. It doesn't matter. Just do something. Stop asking me and do something. But the for those, typically the people that ask that question are people that know nothing about trans and non-binary people. But the bottom line is you don't have to know anything about trans and non-binary people to know that what's happening is wrong. Do you think people being treated with respect and kindness, people being allowed to be themselves, is something that this country should be standing for? Everybody, every single person should be able to be themselves in our country. That's what our country used to stand for. And now it doesn't. So it actually doesn't matter whether you know about trans and non-binary people or not. It's whether you believe that you want to live in a country that respects people to be themselves, to respect whether anybody can be safe and just live their lives how they want to live. And that's a really, really simple concept. And that's the choice you're at now. There's the crossroads we're at. Because if you don't do anything, then next we'll find whether you're Muslim or not being defined, whether you're whatever other identity being defined under law. And the minute we start getting those definitions, then we're in, I know people always bang on about it, but it's true. We'll be in the same place that the German people had been in 1930s Germany. So if you believe in freedom to be who you want to be, freedom to flourish in your life, to take whatever chances and have whatever career and whatever life and whatever happiness you can get, then just do something. And for the trans and non-binary people, you're loved.
That's beautiful.
We'll get through this.
Yeah.
We'll be here. Just make sure you are still here.
Yeah. And run campaigns like, I love the campaign that Katie Neves is running right now, saying that trans women can have my space. And
absolutely. There's that fabulous sticker that Sophie Green, trans artist, has brought out that just simply says trans women are welcome. And if I was being, obviously I can't be an activist and sort of say, well, this would throw the cat among the pigeons, wouldn't it? But if your employer, for instance, said that your women's loo was a single sex space, then if somebody happened to put a trans women are welcome sticker on the door, then it's no longer a single sex space.
And it's simple things like that. It's just simple, right? It is. So we've had a very interesting, engagement, let's say, on this particular comment box. Thank you, Katie Neves. We love you too, and you have all our love. And Rashi Havi, you've been commenting quite a bit. Thank you. And then there's Nikki Zuino. I hope I'm pronouncing it correctly. James Robert, thanks for all kinds of engagement. We welcome any views. You're welcome to say anything you want, but as long as you're respectful towards our trans siblings, that is the only and the most important ask we have. And so, Bobbi, thank you so much. It's been a pleasure having you.
Oh, it's always lovely to see you. And I'm sorry I missed you the other day as well. So.
I'm sure we'll see you soon. And look after yourself. And I know we need you here. So stay. Okay.
I'll be around. Don't worry.
Thank you. And to all the audience who've joined us, thank you very much. It's remember, I keep saying the fight for equality and inclusion it's absolutely ongoing. Your support makes a difference. Stay informed. Easy. There is Google. There's all kinds of people around who can share their views and insights. Stay engaged and stand in solidarity by just not saying it, doing it. It's time to action. And to the others, if you have any feedback or questions, please contact us at theviewsroom@gmail.com. Our intention is to bring such difficult conversations to the forefront, so together we can change the narrative. And have a fantastic day. Thank you, Bobbi, again.
Take care, darling.